Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Caccera, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Caccera.
Welcome in, Joe Caccera with Real Estate Radio Live. This is not a trick. You're seeing us twice in one day, and that's because we have great guests to continue to introduce to you to the consumer. Just a reminder for those that are watching live on Facebook, thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. We're going to continue to grow this audience. For the mere fact of just giving you the education information on our show, we want to try to grow that with many vehicles as possible. Be sure to understand that we do the live feed on Facebook. This becomes the podcast, so we'd love to have you download the podcast. You could find that at iTunes. Go to iTunes, just type in Real Estate Radio Live. You could download it there. Go to our website, RERL-1532. You could download it there. Stitcher, any of those places to find the show. Before I introduce my guest and we get started again, just a reminder, we try to stay on our schedule to do these shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays around 3 o'clock or so Pacific Standard Time. We do get off those schedules depending on the guest sometimes, but we try to stick to that for your convenience. If you need to reach me during the week, Joe at RERadiolive.com. All right, let me invite my guest in, no stranger to the show, Mr. Jack Russo, the managing partner of the ComputerLaw Group. Jack, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks, Joe, for doing this by Zoom, although I guess the video is not working, but hopefully the audio is pretty good. I'm here from New York, where it's 3 hours ahead. I just finished a bunch of meetings here. I'm trying to collapse time and use time as effectively as possible, given that it's still before, is it just about 4 o'clock there, maybe a little after 4 o'clock?
Yeah, about 4 o'clock our time, and it's good that we
right.
at least
7 o'clock here.
Yeah, we got you connected. Unfortunately, we can't see you, but they've seen you on the show, and we'll continue to do these. And those that are just tuning in, if you're not familiar, Jack and I have been doing a ongoing series for several months now, starting something new in Silicon Valley. The objective of the show is to have Jack kind of navigate us through the shows of startups. You know, we've touched on many different things. Ideas, once you have the idea, where do you go from there? How do you raise money? How do you build a team? Lately, we've been talking about, really insurance issues. Today, we're going to talk about crisis management and go into more detail of that. So before we get started, Jack, if you could just give the listeners and the viewers, I guess I would say at the time of this, kind of an overview of you, your firm, and what you practice.
Sure. I'm the managing partner at ComputerLaw Group. We're a Palo Alto, California, Silicon Valley law firm that has been in practice. I've been in practice for nearly 4 decades, and the firm has been operational I left a great firm and started this firm over 3 decades ago. And our practice is really helping startup companies and entrepreneurs get out of the garage and grow their businesses and anticipate problems and, of course, deal with problems that mature into litigation. And often that's a topic of great concern, and it's an example of a crisis. And we'll bring in other examples as we discuss it. But we try to help businesses anticipate and address risks and potential areas that we know will come up, and inevitably generate urgencies that if you're well prepared, you can deal with. If you're not so well prepared, you have to deal with it in a more urgent way. Obviously, you can't anticipate everything. I mean, earthquakes happen, tsunamis happen, climate change is happening. A lot of stuff is happening that is not totally under everyone's control, but if you get your arms around some of it, you can anticipate it and be ready for it.
So I think the way we've discussed before, and I think I want to set this up as we get started, Jack, is that, almost like healthcare, and there's a lot of people that will say, well, we're spending way too much money on hospitals, healthcare in general. We should be spending more money, time, and resources on prevention. So in this case, I would say that a lot of stuff that you've talked about before leading into crisis management would be the things that put into place to prevent potential things from coming up. Of course, like you mentioned, something could come up that none of us know about. But I guess first and foremost, would it be prepare yourself the best you can, right? And then from there, all you could do is when it comes up, you deal with it the best you can.
Right. I mean, I think I'd start with, if you were to review all 14 or 15 or so pod, I think this might be number 16.
Right.
It's either number 15 or number 16. We've talked about all the various things that people do in getting an idea from the abstract, intangible thing that it is to something that's actionable and that can be implemented and that creates new value. And it's that new value that customers, shareholders, investors, partners, and others pay for and put time and money into to grow. I mean, Facebook started as an idea. Apple Computers started as an idea. Those things didn't just happen. They happened because people put time and effort into taking the idea and implementing it. Along the way, a business was created, and along the way, a lot of goodwill was generated, and other things happened that turn. And I think Apple might be the first company that gets to $1 trillion valuation. I saw the stock market today. I think it was the only company that was up, and it looks like it's over 900 billion in value. And along the way, they've had their share of crises, and they've survived them. They almost went out of business at one point. They were bailed out by Microsoft. There were things that were not anticipated. But what I'd like to start with is when you form a company, you're forming a company as a limited liability entity, whether that's an LLC, limited liability company, or a corporation, or a limited partnership, or some other type of limited entity. You're doing it because you want to contain the risk. And the entity itself represents a way to take risk and box off unlimited liability. And that's the starting point. So doing that selection correctly, documenting it correctly, maintaining it correctly, doing all the corporate formalities correctly, doing all the right things to make sure that you're in compliance with law on the corporate side. Those are all normal housekeeping maintenance, not unlike brushing and flossing your teeth. Some people brush. Most people probably don't floss as often as they should. But a dentist would say to you, look, if you want to have good longevity of your existing teeth, you've got to do certain maintenance things. Okay, now every once in a while, you're going to chip a tooth or crack a tooth or do something, unfortunately you might bite into something that you think is a nut and it turns out that it's actually really hard and it cracks a tooth. That's going to cause a lot of pain and probably some immediate action. You might not anticipate it, but you have to know what professional to go to address the problem. So some of it is just building your network of professionals that you can turn to. Say, look, I've got a serious problem. It wasn't really anticipated. We don't have an automated way to deal with it. Let's now sit down together and address it. So I like to say structurally, you're forming the business knowing that you're setting sail on seas and waters that may change and for which you can't directly control the climate or the full ecosystem as it changes. Look, a crisis that recently occurred, but I think Google was ready for it, is a $5 billion fine charged by the EU based on a finding that the way in which they implemented Android was anti-competitive. Now, they had some notice of that. They're going to fight that, but they've already taken the $5 billion reserve. Had that been levied against a less financially stable company, might well have put them out of business. I don't think the stock market even moved the needle on that because Google had anticipated that they were going to have to deal with the EU and they're going to fight it. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of cycles to that litigation, but ultimately they're reserving those funds. And it's a point that you can't perfectly anticipate what's going to happen because we live in a dynamic society. Lots of things changes and crises happen. And you have to sort of understand that part of corporate planning is because crises happen. And I'm going to give some other examples that come up in daily life that I've seen over the last nearly 40 years of doing this that are sort of the common, I call them kind of the 5 common areas for which companies and founders and management and boards will turn to lawyers and other professionals to deal with crises. And by no means is that exclusive. It's really just a way to illustrate things that happen along the way. And some of it you can plan, some of it you can try to buy some insurance for, some of it you can do risk management around, some of it your planning may well be able to aid you with, and some of it you just have to turn to professionals and you have to do the best you can and make the best lemonade that you can with a batch of lemons that you wish weren't dealt to you, but it does happen to you. It does happen from time to time.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break for the podcast, just a minute for those that are following us on Facebook. Stick with us. We're live here with Jack Russo. He's calling in from New York. We're talking about crisis management. We're going to take a 1-minute break, and we're going to come back and continue the show. This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Again, stick with us. We'll be back with you in just a minute.
For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com.
Getting ready to buy or sell a home in 30, 60, or 90 days? Then check out BundleSelect.com to find out how you could save 20% or more on your entire transaction. Save on real estate, lending, and title. With BundleSelect.com, technology and a personal concierge are at your service to save you time and money. Bundle Select's hand-picked team of experts will compete for your business, so you'll save thousands of dollars by bundling all of these services. BundleSelect.com gives you all the control, including using your own realtor. I'm Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live, and I have been on the radio educating consumers for years. By bundling services like real estate, lending, and title, you could save tens of thousands of dollars. Act now, and this new model could save you money on your move, lower your interest rate, or cover your closing costs. Visit BundleSelect.com. That's BundleSelect.com.
The estimated minimum savings are based on a comparison with the national average. Individual results may vary, and the estimated savings are not guaranteed. Bundle Select Inc. is a licensed real estate broker. California Bureau of Real Estate Broker license number 004666902.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's topic or guests, just visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Live, Joe Kuchera.
Welcome back in. Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for those that are joining us today. And no, it's not to your imagination. We're doing 2 shows today based on our schedule and our guests. And Jack Russo is calling us from New York in between some meetings. He is chiming in with us. We're talking today about crisis management. We're taking you through a number of different courses. I think this is, again, 15 or 16 in the series that we've done over the last several months. We'll continue to do that and just educating people on all different aspects of startups. And today, again, it's crisis management. What I'll throw back at you, Jack, before you continue what you were talking about is that, you know, one of the examples I'm thinking of as you're talking about this is Wells Fargo, because it's in our industry. You know, Wells Fargo has gotten themselves, right or wrong, in a lot of trouble. They've been in the media the last several years, anywhere from their employees opening up false accounts for people unknowing authorization to illegal, redlining programs in real estate, charging minorities more. I mean, going on and on about all the things that they've been in trouble for the last couple of years. How do you, I guess one of the things that comes up, and you may get there, but it's one thing to have a company, Jack, with 4 or 5 people. You can kind of manage your surroundings. You know what people are doing each day. You know, when you have a company that have thousands of employees and you have social media and you have all these different outlets, is that a component of training, education? How do you get everybody on the same page to try to mitigate the potential issue of this type of stuff?
Right. I mean, I could say something really simple like pick the best people you can and understand that a lot of the problems are solved if you choose to do business with people that are worthy of trust and that generate loyalty back to you. And that would be kind of a platitude, because the reality is as you grow and as you get bigger and bigger, inevitably you're not going to end up with just the most preferred people. And this is sort of that book, Small is Beautiful, that talks about how, well, when you stay small, you can be really selective.
Right.
Well, but the problem is there's too much work.
Yeah.
And as these companies get successful, they've got to add people and they've got to leverage the technology and the people that they have as best they can But sure, training is absolutely a big component. Cultural development as part of the training is a big part of it. Leadership that seems to just inspire people to do great work is part of it. And then just smart things like I can tell a story here, and it's one of the 5 that I'll tell if you'll allow it, which is that there are even really smart lawyers that I've had call me and have said to me, you know, I didn't realize that my office manager stole like $500,000 over the last 10 years from a client trust account, and now I'm in trouble with the state bar. Can you help me to understand and help me to maneuver around, you know, all sorts of issues, including whether there might or might not be insurance coverage? And we covered that in the last show on insurance. And I say, but you're a smart lawyer. He says, well, I've just been too busy running my practice and taking care of my clients. I thought the office manager who had been with me for 10 years was honest. Yeah. She or he was faking a bunch of invoices. I never went back and checked. And I said, well, did you ever have an audit firm on a yearly basis? It would have probably cost you a couple of $1,000s a year to go in and look at the books and records and just act as a new set of eyes. Oh, I didn't think we need it because the office manager was also our accountant. I said, well, that's a basic rule of thumb that you don't have the same person who's responsible for writing the checks, auditing the checks. You got to have another set of eyes. I mean, it's a little bit like that film that talks about how Las Vegas works. The pit boss is looking at the dealer. The camera in the sky is looking at the pit boss. Someone else is looking at the camera in the sky from the people that are looking. You know, it's like there's multiple layers of review. So you can bake some of that in. Obviously, a small business often just doesn't have that luxury. Bigger businesses do a lot of stuff designed to create redundancy. And that problem of what might be called employee dishonesty, employee theft, some of it can be insured around. But oftentimes people don't even think they need to get that insurance. They only find out later, gosh, we can't account for a huge amount of money that was lost. And then, of course, it could either bankrupt them or it can force them to go to their personal savings and pull out a lot of what was expected to be their retirement money to essentially make good on funds that were lost. And this happens, you know, all over America all the time, unfortunately. And it does represent something that just does generate a crisis. And oftentimes, if you have done no thinking, like, can this really happen to me? It puts you in a state of shock. And really just getting you out of the state of shock becomes a big part of the counseling function that lawyers and others that you turn to have to deal with.
Is there a format? I know that the different steps, suggestions, you know, if someone's starting a company right now, Jack, or even they're starting to grow and they know this is important, but they don't have the first, you know, I mean, everybody's focused on sales and growth and, you know, technology, but this is so important. And I'm glad you're talking about this today because it usually, unfortunately, it doesn't become serious until it becomes serious. So what are some of the things that you would recommend a company, whether they're getting started or they're growing, to put into place to potentially safeguard? Again, we all know that if something happens, you know, sometimes there's no control over certain things, but what types of measures or steps or systems, processes do you put in place to do the best you can at safeguarding something?
Right. So the word systems is really the right keyword because certainly there's lots of online systems. QuickBooks sells a lot of copies of its software. Now it's in the cloud, so you don't even need to download the software. Right. But what's important is there's still a human element. So when we talk about forming a board of directors or forming a board of advisors, it's not just perfunctory. Somebody on that board of directors or board of advisors should become the go-to person to say, look, Joe, Jack, Jim, whoever that person is, Judy, any Jane, anyone, hey, I'd like to get a few hours of your time quarterly. Take a look at my quarterly numbers and let me know, does something look out of whack in your experience? And it might be someone with an accounting background. It might be someone who's just got a business background. It might just be someone with a fresh set of eyes that says, Joe, why are you spending what seems to be 5 times the average for the size of your company on maintenance of your office? Or something that's just out of whack. Like, people are mowing your lawn for $600 a month. What kind of lawn do you have there?
Yeah.
You know, somewhere in it, there's all of these little clues that you wouldn't pick up because you're almost too close to it. Like food and beverage or travel and entertainment. You see this a lot where, you know, there's all kinds of stories of, I'm not going to say I've seen them all, but there's certainly stories of salespeople that put down all sorts of extravagant things as part of their travel and entertainment budget. And when you drill down, you know, they're doing stuff with that money that's not even legal. And there's all kinds of stories about how when it's audited, it's like this money went to crazy things that should have never been paid for by the company. And it's not really even tax deductible when you look at like what it was used for. It was really an improper theft of company funds. So that's the first category, just dealing with disloyalty, breach of fiduciary duty, breach of just basic ethics. And you could say it's a people choice on the way in, or you could say it's a bad audit or a bad training or a bad culture, or maybe you're not paying your employees enough and they're taking it out in other ways. But that's a big moment of crisis, and it happens all the time and you see it. So that's one example. And that's on the tangible side. Then I'd like to go to the second one that often really upsets people, which is the theft of information on the intangible side. And this was a recent example that happened where a gentleman left a big company and was on a plane or about to get on a plane to China. I think it was either Apple or Google or one of the big companies, and took with him a USB drive that had a ton of information about the self-driving car. And it's not the Uber Waymo case, but it's a case involving Apple, where Apple's done a lot of research about self-driving cars as well. And a criminal indictment has been brought against that individual because it looked like he was seeking to take trade secrets, easily transported USB drives, now small ones, like literally that fit in your pocket, can have terabytes of information. It's unheard of. And that information can move very, very quickly. Now, the benefit some companies have is they run programs that watch how much traffic is moving from a server over to an external device, and they can spot it and flag it. But they don't always do that. Now, sometimes they do, and when they do, and they can grab the person before they leave the country with that device, they have a chance of recovering. But had that person been able to get on the flight and gotten to the foreign country, that data would be lost forever. And that could be billions of dollars worth of research and competitive advantage that might be going essentially to a direct competitor. Now, Apple may have caught that on time, maybe, maybe not. I mean, we'll find out. But that second area, which again is in the same category of employee dishonesty, it could even be contractor dishonesty, where they have access to valuable information. In the first case, it's tangible dollars. In the second case, it's intangible information. You can have all the intellectual property protections in the world, but if someone steals that data and then moves it overseas, it's very difficult to get an overseas court to pay a lot of attention to a U.S. company. And even though you can try to get a U.S. court to do something, once the individual is outside the U.S., it's not impossible, but it's close to impractical to get something to happen. So that's the second class of case. A crisis can be started around, and it generates a lot of litigation. And it also generates a question of how powerful are the U.S. courts? And we've talked about this whole area of protecting trade secrets, taking precautions. Obviously, there are companies that don't even allow computers to have USB cables attached to them when they have access to sensitive data. They literally seal off those ports because they're worried about that type of case happening over and over again. And again, you have to move very quickly to get to court very quickly while the person is in the U.S. so appropriate judicial relief can be had and can be implemented by the authorities.
Very good. You know, before you go to the next one, as you mentioned that first one, I mean, there was a real example years ago. I had invested in a venture capital firm, and, you know, I noticed when I was looking at the annual reports, I'm not sure if it was the annual reports or something, but one of the things that caught my eye, and as soon as you said this is a good example you brought up, is there seemed to be a large amount of money, in my opinion, proportionally going to one of the partners on personal expenses like personal driver and meal service and all this kind of stuff. So, it's kind of interesting. When you brought that example up, Jack, I actually brought this up. It wasn't real popular. This was years ago because some people said, well, lay off of it. The person's doing this, this, and this. But to me, in a startup, and when you're using other people's money, you have to be very careful how you're spending it. And
well, that's right.
Right?
Right. That's right. There are blurred lines and there are gray lines. I mean, look, people go out to dinner in Silicon Valley, and I've seen them spend $200-300 a person. So 4 or 5 person meal is over $1,000. And years ago, we would all wince at that and say that's just over the top. But the reality is the pricing has completely changed and the way people do entertainment has changed.
Right.
So you have to have a set of policies and, you don't want to be a bureaucracy, but the culture really starts at the top. And if someone, like I fly coach all the time and people look at me like, why do you fly coach? And I'm like, I don't think paying 7 or 8 times the price for an airline ticket is worth it. And I don't think it's fair to the client either. And they're like, yeah, but you've been around long enough and da-da-da-da. And I hear all these justifications. I say, look, I might pay $50 extra for an exit seat, but that's about it. And of course, there are people that look at me like, hey, you're not with it. And I just think at the end of the day, you are a fiduciary for your client. You should do the right thing.
Yeah.
I do want to interject here. There was something that President Eisenhower, previously he was General Eisenhower, did. And if we had a whiteboard, we would put up a little matrix, a 2x2 matrix. And we would say, look, what Eisenhower said is all of life is divided into 4 squares. Just imagine like a matrix of a cross. And at the top, you've got things that are important versus less important as the 2 columns. And the 2 rows are things that are urgent or become urgent and things that are not urgent or less urgent. So obviously things that are really less important and not urgent, you really should delegate those things. Things that are urgent and important, like a crisis, you've got to deal with it. You have to be ready and you've got to be thinking through and anticipating, I may have this problem. And you have to hope that when things are not urgent but important, like dealing with culture of loyalty and trying to train people and get the right people and police the people that signal that they really are being dishonest or they're doing something that signals a form of dishonesty, you got to act on that early enough to try to say, look, I'm just going to have a zero tolerance. I mean, look, here's a third crisis, and it's a big one. Sexual harassment in the workplace. It's a big deal. And look, it's become bigger and bigger. And look at all these names, one after the other after the other. I mean, we can't even get a full list because the list keeps getting added to. That has generated a crisis in a number of boardrooms.
Right.
And when you look at what's played out in terms of the amount of corporate shareholder value that's been lost to CEOs and other people in power. And I think it goes both ways. There have been stories of obviously men harassing women. There have been stories of women harassing men, women harassing other women, men harassing other men. I mean, it's like almost every combination you can imagine. And, we have a culture clash in America where power seems to have historically accepted conduct that is not conduct that's appropriate in the workplace. And people have not fully understood that. Now, the movement that's occurred, the Me Too movement and things that have used less litigation and more publicity and PR. But that third area of sexual harassment generally, what I would just call harassment generally. And, some people think the workplace is too sterile. Some people think you can't tell a joke anymore in the workplace. Maybe so, maybe not. But you got to be sensitive when it's not urgent and it's important to do some things that anticipate. And what we do in our firm, because I had a classmate that wrote the book on it, we bought like 20 of his books. And whenever we have a new person come in, whether it's a male or female, whether straight, gay, or otherwise, we just give them the book and say, look, part of what you have to do is read this and watch the videotape. And then we're going to talk about, we have a zero tolerance place, and you really have to live with zero tolerance, which is if someone does something wrong, you got to show them to the door and say, look, this is a serious, there's no cure for this. You've really done something that's not acceptable. Thank you very much. Yeah. Here's your final check. Goodbye. And a lot of people won't do that, particularly if it's a person who's producing a lot of value. And of course, you get these stories where it's papered over, even at the level of very senior people. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's a third area that you have to be very sensitive to, and you have to address head on if you're going to run a business and it's going to be just more than you and maybe a few close family members. And even there, I'd say you have to be sensitive because family members who are employees have rights to sue as well.
Right. I have just a couple minutes left. Anything for a wrap-up summary for the crisis management today?
Yeah, let me just quickly go over just the fourth and fifth case because people will be wondering. Well, the fourth case is the loss of a key person who is leaving for a competitor, because in California in particular, and really generally throughout the United States, employees are not bound to remain forever, and they could and are legally entitled to become competitors. Particularly in California, we have a strong policy in favor of mobility. That's a crisis. People lose a key person, a key partner. Often they may even still be a shareholder in the company. Right. That generates a crisis, and you have to have some procedures in your agreements to deal with how the transition is handled, to avoid unfair competition, to make sure it's as smooth as it can be, even though the person might be becoming a direct competitor or might be going to a direct competitor. Right. And then the last case I'll give you is the crisis that's very hard to recover from, which is the founder, visionary CEO who has a heart attack or has a disability or got some illness or Steve Jobs. Yeah. I mean, look, when Steve Jobs became ill, everyone thought, holy moly, this could be the end of Apple. And of course, the board mobilized and Tim Cook stepped up to the plate, and obviously the company has done well ever since. But there was a big succession question. So baking into the business some thinking about succession becomes pretty important. And that's the fifth crisis, when the leader, the visionary, the guy or gal who really makes the difference ends up not being able to do it because of health or other reasons. And a lot of them come up. And if you haven't given some thought to succession, you really almost have to do that from the get-go. Yeah. Even though a lot of people are like, hey, we just started, why even talk that way? Well, because the reality is lightning strikes, and you got to have a backup plan. And I can tell you a lot of stories on that. We'll defer them for another day. But the point is, the wrap-up point is, try to deal with it in the matrix of important but not urgent, so you can think through who is the person that's got all the passwords if Sally leaves, and she's the one that historically has run all of the virtual accounts. I can't tell you the number of cases we get where people say, I lost a key employee, and by the way, they were the ones that had all the passwords for all my virtual accounts. I don't even have a way to get into my bank account, and they're not cooperating anymore. Wow. What do I do now? And that happens. And, there's certain things courts will do for you and certain things you would hope you wouldn't have to go to a court for. So try to anticipate it and stay in that part of the Eisenhower matrix where you're able to deliberate and make some decisions and some plans and some backup plans without being in that urgent, critical situation where you really have to be under the gun, realizing that at times you will inevitably be under the gun, but let's hope you've thought through some of what can be done to address the problem in advance.
All right. Very good. Well said, Jack. Real quick before we let you go, again, for those that might want to get a hold of you or your firm, they need some assistance or help or questions, what's the best way to do that?
So it's Jack at ComputerLaw.com, and it's 650-327-9800. ComputerLaw.com is the website. We're in downtown Palo Alto. We're happy to hear from people. Thank you, Joe, for referring people to us.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show. I think it's helped people. We let people listen to your show as part of their training. So we try to get a 2-for-1 out of the time that we put in. So there's really some good training materials that come out of this, which we want to thank you for, because without your motivation, I don't think it would have ever occurred. So thank you again for allowing that.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Appreciate that, Jack. Always good having you on. Safe travels on the way back home, and hopefully we'll have you back next week.
All right.
All right. Take care. This is Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for Jack Russo calling in from New York, and we are tuning out for today. Thanks again for checking in. We'll be back with you next Tuesday. Take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.